I am not ready to make this video. And my fear is that I will never be ready to make this video. And for that reason, I'm making this video. There are a couple of reasons why I will probably never be ready. The first is logistically. This video or these videos could be very long. The number one thing I'm self-conscious about when making YouTube videos is the amount of time that I could take out of your day because my video is too long. One of the earliest complaints that I ever got on a YouTube video was, man, you talked for too long. And that has been repeated by other people. And there may be some validity to that, but it's also who I am. And I think I have to be who I am in these YouTube videos in order to keep making them. It's still not something that I can compartmentalize all the time. So this is going to be a multi-part series as it relates to my deconstruction. And if you don't know what deconstruction is, in short, it is my growing up as a fundamental evangelical Christian and how that shaped my life and ultimately led me to where I am now, which I'm not sure exactly how I would define myself. It would not be an evangelical Christian, and that is for part 4, 5, or 6 whenever we get there. So again, this is going to be heavily podcast form. If I told myself at the beginning of this series that I was going to sit down and edit it, I would never make it. When you think about taking the last 30 years of your life and breaking it down, because Christianity was my life. Let's be very clear. This was not something that I did on the weekends for fun. This was something that I lived and tried to live 24/7 for my entire life. So trying to organize that logistically into easily digested bite-sized YouTube videos is incredibly difficult. And not only is it difficult, it's daunting, and so daunting that I would never make the video unless I sat down here at 9:16 on a January night with a cup of decaf coffee and just spilled my guts. So why am I spilling my guts? Why is this important? We'll get to the second thing. We're talking logistics now. The other piece of why I'm not ready and will never be is like the emotional capacity of it, which we'll get there. So why? It can be incredibly, and I speak from experience, incredibly scary, lonely, just empty feeling to walk away from something that's been your identity and feel like you can't talk about it. Because inside of Christianity, it is incredibly caged off. The parables of the lost sheep, right? God is going to come after the one sheep and leave the 99 if he strays away from him. The idea that, we have to bring in, there are frameworks set up within Christianity that keep people in for longer than they may feel like they need to. And to leave Christianity is terrifying. So the reason why I'm making this video and the reason why I've taken so long to make this video is because it is terrifying. And so these things are overlapping. Again, the emotional thing and why I'm making it. So when I was leaving, the number one most helpful thing were Rhett and Link's Deconstruction podcasts. If you don't know who Rhett and Link are, I'm shocked. I bet you do. They are podcasters, they're YouTubers, and they grew up very similarly to how I grew up. And they talked about it. And they talked about eventually leaving the church and what their life has looked like. And that was the single most helpful resource that I had during my years of doubting, processing, feeling lonely, etc. Were those podcasts. And they each released their own episode as it related to their life. And then year after year, they updated on it. And they're 4 or 5 years into it now. So I understand how helpful it can be to hear the perspective of someone who's lived it and glean even the smallest bit of support or just have something in common with somebody and understand that you aren't alone. So what is nice about this that was not helpful to me about them is I could not engage with them in any way. This has a comment box down below. If you want to talk to me, and this video is going to be up forever as far as I know. Like, it's 2025. This may be something that people come back to years down the line. If you are going through something similar and you want to talk about any of this, by all means. And this is part 1, so there's a chance somebody walks in on part 3 and is like, what's going on? Hopefully they watch all of this, but I understand it could be a daunting task. So I am doing this hopefully to help somebody, which 5 years ago, if I would have said this guy is not encouraging, but he is allowing people to question their faith, to doubt their faith, and to ultimately walk away from Christ, I would have been like, wow, like he's worse than just a non-Christian. He is actively pulling people out of Christianity and leading them to hell. Which maybe takes me to the emotional part. I am terrified because I think there are people in my life who don't know this to be true about me still. Now, the odds that those people ever find this video is pretty slim. But it's scary when you have been something to someone or something for someone, or someone has an idea of you in their head, and it's like the core idea of you, who you are at your fundamental core, and eternity is on the line, and that is shaken up. Shake it up, right? That's scary. And the last thing I want to be is not even a burden to somebody, but just like I don't really like to talk to Christians about this, is the way I'll say it. And I think there are Christians who could watch this and who could make all kinds of conjectures about what I'm going to say, and that's totally fine because I would have done the same thing. But nobody can tell you how you feel inside. And I think that's a big piece. So this is daunting emotionally just because I know I have close friends and family who may watch this and who may say, what? You're not a Christian? Oh my, I'm going to pray for you. Like, how can I help? And it's like it's just easier to kind of keep it all down in a secret, especially if I'm in a good place right now, which I feel like I am in the best place of my life, which still feels wrong to say. Like I still have some of that Christian guilt, that tinge of I shouldn't say that I'm happier without God. Like that makes God mad if God is real. That makes God jealous. That makes me go to hell. Like I still have that cognitive dissonance. I'm going to take a drink because we're 8 minutes in. Again, this is decaf house blend. Maybe I should have had caffeinated. I don't know. Normally I would edit that out, but I'm not going to. Okay, so I guess we start at the beginning. And this is going to lead up to, I feel like we're done. And then part 2 will be, I'm going in chronological order because it's incredibly important that we go in that order and lead up to present day. So my guess, we'll see how long this goes. We'll just roll. So I was born in the Midwest to old parents. I say old. They were late 30s when they had me. They were married late in terms of like age-wise. They were married late. And I was born and I was relatively healthy. And there were periods of time where I had semi-serious illnesses where I was in the hospital. I don't remember those. I was just told of that. And, I would say my childhood was incredibly happy, incredibly good. No true trauma that I can think of, which is an amazing blessing. We started to attend a church as young as I can remember, probably 4, and this is the church that I had grown up in. There were families in that church who also had boys my age, 2 who were born within 4 months of me, and another one who had a sister born within 4 months of me and a son born a year and a half before me. So from literal childbirth, I was surrounded in, and if you guys are in the church, you understand the community, how powerful, how positive it can be, how also detrimental it can be if things go awry, which we'll get to. But I look back on those times in these boys that I grew up with. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we went to this church, and with my friends, my best friends at the time, and the church was held in a local high school gymnasium, and I remember that, and that's where it was. And then eventually, through fundraising and tithing and such, they built a standalone church not too far away from the high school. And I remember that build. I have vivid memories of it being constructed. It was a good time. It was a fun time. And it's some of my best memories was the church growing up at that age. And I continued to be best friends with these kids. I mean, sleepovers, birthday parties, you name it. Anything that we did, or I did. I didn't really have a lot of friends outside of these kids until I got into elementary school, which is a long way off from here. So I'm talking, 4 to 5 to 6. I get into elementary school. I do make other friends, but as far as my out of school endeavors, all church people. I did not start hanging out with friends from school until we left this church, which is coming. Okay. So I say all this and I repeat myself possibly just to stress the fact that this was good. What the church afforded me in terms of friendship, in terms of community, in terms of pure joy. I mean, I still have vivid memories of playing Nintendo 64 with these kids, sleepovers, birthday parties. Every day, every Sunday after church, we would go out in the front and play football. Rain, shine, it didn't matter. We were out there playing football, and it was awesome, right? And I realize I'm talking a lot about church, right? I haven't talked about God, but at that age, I understood the stories. I understood kind of what it meant, but I didn't know what it meant. So they built this church, and we continued going to this church. And this wasn't just Sundays, guys. I mean, we were a Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday small group. Like, church was my life. Church was my parents' life. And it, like I said, was great. Carry-ins, euchre tournaments. If you don't know what euchre is, you're not from the Midwest, evidently. It was a small church. By today's standards, it was probably a congregation of 25 to 50 families. So not too small. It was perfect size. I would say it's perfect size for a church. You know everybody. There's enough for different small groups, different age ranges. There's kids, there's old people. Like, it was a good church, I thought. It I don't have a ton of, we had the vacation Bible schools and things like that. I don't have a ton of, I'm going to turn my phone on Do Not Disturb. I don't know how I didn't do that from the get-go. I don't have a ton of, like, Christian memories. I will say I remember a Good Friday service. If you don't know what Good Friday is, I don't know why you've watched this for 14 minutes. Good Friday is the day of Christ's death on the cross. Like, it's the Friday before Easter, the day he was killed. And I still have these vivid memories in my head of going to a Good Friday service. And guys, I'm 5, 6, 7, and I'm being told about Christ's crucifixion, which, like, in the Christian culture, like, that's so normal. But now that I look back, and now that I have a child, it's like, now that I have a child and I've deconstructed, it's like, would I take my, 5, my kid's not 5 yet, but would I take her at 5 years old and be like, this is what happened to a person? And I get it when you believe that, and when you think about the Savior, and when that is your whole identity, and that is your Savior, and that's who you believe is going to come back and take you with him for eternity. Like, yeah, right? Like, because without that sacrifice, without that death on the cross, the resurrection means nothing, right? Like, I get it. Like, I understand that piece. But just contextually for a child, that's a lot. And obviously it's a lot because if I have to point to one sermon or one thing I remember, this is it. So the fact that I'm able to remember this 25 years later shows you the impact it had on me. So I remember the service, Good Friday service, and the pastor dismissed us and nobody was allowed to talk. Like, we left the auditorium congregation hall silently. And you could not speak until you got to your car. Like, that was the directive. And I remember Pontius Pilate, right? Like, that's what I kept like playing in my head, Pontius Pilate. And we walked to the car and we were silent. We got in the car and I'm sure my dad like asked me about it and quizzed me about it and asked me to tell him what it all meant. I was always, what'd you learn at Sunday school? Like, I was always encouraged to share. And again, I watched the Veggie Tales. I watched the McGee and Me. I did a nighttime devotional every night. I mean, we had a devotional for boys, 365 of them every night. My dad or mom would come in. They would lay on the bed with me. We would read the devotional. We would say the prayer. We would read the Bible verse. And that was that. I accepted God into my heart. And I put that in quotes for a reason in a second. I haven't talked this much for this long since teaching, so I'm really stretching the range of these vocal cords. I say I accepted Christ into my heart at 4 because while I understood what it meant, I don't know if a 4-year-old can conceptualize death on a cross from a man who's both man and God, who's both son, but both God, dies bloody death, and then is buried, and then comes back, and believing in that story dictates your future after you die. That's heavy for me at 30. That's a lot to process. So as a 4-year-old, I prayed the prayer, right? Lord, come into my heart, be the leader of my life. I want to accept you as my Savior. I'll follow you. I'll seek you. I'll worship you. I'll love you above everything else. That kind of thing. And, there were periods of time later on in life where I wondered, oh, was that I was 4, I should probably do it again. I don't want to go to hell. So we're at VBS when I'm 8. Pray this prayer if you haven't. Well, I did at 4. But I better pray it again, just to make sure. At this point in my life, at this young age, I was not obsessed with hell and heaven in the way that I would become chronically obsessed with hell. We will talk about it later, but if you Google scrupulosity or religious OCD, I have no doubt in my mind that I had severe religious OCD. Now, I don't know who can diagnose, but eventually it would become, and I think I had OCD as a kid and an adult growing up. If I was out playing basketball, I had to hit a certain number of shots before I went inside or my mom was going to die, that night. Those were the kind of thoughts that I would have. And sorry, I should have trigger warnings. I apologize. This is your trigger warning for the rest of the thing. If I didn't put all the forks away when I was doing the dishes, if I didn't put all the forks away first, car accident, that kind of thing. Like that's how my brain was. I was not well as a kid and an adult. I'm medicated now, and my OCD thoughts are significantly, if not all the way, suppressed. So, hallelujah. Is that ironic? So I stayed at this church with my best friends. Now, an interesting facet of this is no, I went to the city schools. None of these friends went to the city schools. They all went to the county schools. So I didn't have an interaction with these best friends throughout the week. And to be honest, the kids in my class were not Christians, as far as I could tell. And buddy, I could tell because I made sure to ask them. There is this, my mom has a scrapbook actually. I wouldn't call it a running joke, but it wasn't really it was this running joke that if we went on vacation, I would always want to have a hotel with a pool. When I would swim at the hotel pool, if there was another kid, I would say, "What's your name? Where are you from? And are you a Christian?" And I thought that was normal. I thought that was normal behavior. And maybe it is. And it's definitely normal behavior to Christians, evangelical Christians. Talking for 20 minutes can wear your throat down. But that was my routine. So I was always, and this was young. I mean, this was 5, 6, 7, 8. I was always obsessed with, or the people in my life that I am encountering, that I am building a relationship with, do they already have a relationship with God? Before I was shaving, like before I was 5 feet tall, like that's the way I rolled. It's in the scrapbook. I could find it. And the reason it's in the scrapbook is the kid said that I asked. He said, "No, I'm not a Christian. I'm a Methodist." At that time, I didn't even know what that meant. My parents laughed. They came up to me. They said, "Oh, is he a Christian?" I said, "Nah, he's a Methodist." And they thought it was the funniest thing of all time. And like now looking back, it is funny. I didn't understand because I didn't know about denominations. So while we're on that topic, let's talk about it. So we went to a Presbyterian church. And I'll just say this. Presbyterian, then we went to non-denominational, aka megachurch, aka, oh boy. Then we went to a Methodist church, then we went to another non-denominational, and then nothing. So at this Presbyterian church, I would say it's a pretty normal Christian church, a little more traditional than a Methodist church. We were there. From the time they built it, I was probably 5 years old when they got their own church until I was in second grade. So I was 8 years old. And this part I will never forget. I was sitting next to my dad and next to one of my best friends. And normally we would be in children's church. So if you're not familiar, pastor comes up, prays, music comes up, you sing some songs, 3 songs usually. Then they take the offering, announcements, and then the kids are dismissed. Kids go off to Sunday school or children's church, where they have a lesson more tailored to their abilities and mental capacity, and the adults stay for the actual sermon. Well, this Sunday was different. They asked that all the kids stay. There would be no children's church. Again, right? It's not weird to me. It's just, okay, I guess I'll sit here and talk to my buddy and we'll play tic-tac-toe, right? And I wasn't paying any attention. And again, to this day, when I talk about core memories, I can see my dad leaning over to me, stern, no nonsense, because I was kind of goofing with my friend here. No nonsense. He says, "Do you understand what's happening right now?" And I said, "Yes." I had no idea. None. Even if I was paying attention, I would have had no idea. Sermon ended. We get up. Everybody's hugging the pastor. We go outside. I have a vivid memory of outside. My family was one of the first to leave in a rush almost. Pastor comes out. We get in our car. We leave. And my parents are like, "Do you know what happened?" I was like, "No." And they're like, "The pastor's resigning." What's resign, right? Like, my dad is so serious And I think in some ways, in a lot of ways, that's great. In a lot of ways, it helped me mature faster. In a lot of ways, it helps me understand the world better. But when you talk about developmentally appropriate, my father was just like always like 5 or 10 years above where I was, which again is probably good ultimately. But he's talking to me as an adult. He's talking to me like I was an adult at 8 years old. I was 8 years old. I don't know what resign means. So he says, pastor's resigning. He's quitting. He's done. He was old, right? I didn't think anything of it. And thus began a weird, maybe subconscious, I wouldn't even say distrust, but confusion about what goes on politically in the church. Because my parents did not tell me. I said my dad was always talking to me like an adult. This is one thing he did not disclose until many, many, many years later when I was able to understand it. So I'll tell you, they didn't tell me what happened. They just said some things happened, he's done. And I was always kind of confused because I could tell by their attitude that it wasn't like, pastor's old, he's just going to do something else. It was always something like something happened. So here's what happened. And this should have been a red flag. I mean, this should have been a maroon, this should have been a crimson flag. And it wasn't. And now that I have grown up and I've seen and heard stories of churches far and wide, it's like, yeah, of course this happened at my church. Like it happens everywhere. This isn't a one-off thing. So this is what I know. I don't know a ton of details, still don't to this day. If I asked, I could maybe get a few more. But on principle, there was the pastor. Underneath the pastor was a board of elders or deacons or whatever they were called. People who are in charge of making decisions for the church. These guys were what I would call the wealthy families of the church, the bougie families of the church. There were all kinds of socioeconomic, distributions within the church. These people were like they lived on the private golf course type of energy, country club people. And I'm not saying anything bad about that type of person, but they stood out above everyone else in the church in that way. Again, it's not a judgment or a stare. I'm not trying to people who are country club people automatically are X, Y, or Z. It's not what I'm trying to say. It just, I'm trying to frame it for you so you can kind of understand and kind of relate to it. So the board members, the country club people, right under the pastor in terms of power, or maybe even I don't know how power structures work in the church. I always thought pastor was at the top, but clearly not. They were upset with the pastor's sermons. They were upset with how the church was being run. They were not pleased with what was happening. They didn't understand the direction of the church. I don't know what. I'm sure there were actually deeper motivations, maybe monetarily, maybe clique-wise. I don't know. But these board members made up a rumor that the pastor was in a homosexual relationship, that they had caught him in a homosexual relationship. And that became something that ran its way around. And when he resigned, I think my parents knew part of that, or they had heard stirrings of that. And we did not know if we were done at the church. But either the day he resigned or a week after, because we stayed at the church maybe a week or two. It wasn't long. But evidently my dad heard two of the board members, deacons, bishops, whatever you call them, laughing about their ability to get him out based on this rumor. There was something to the effect of my dad walked through an entryway or walked past something and they were like, oh, I can't believe that word, something to that effect. The bottom line is The pastor was forced out because members of the church with power made up a rumor about him being a homosexual, and he was put in a position where he had to resign or he was going to be voted out because they were upset with him and they thought the most reasonable way to get rid of him was to say he was gay. So yeah, you probably don't tell like an 8-year-old that. So when I learned that later on in life, I was confused. We'll go back. I was incredibly sad. Like, I remember being so sad and confused because this was my life. These friends I had were my only real friends that I was going to heaven with someday. Like, these guys were my everything. I don't want to be dramatic, but like, they were like my brothers that I didn't have. And for my parents to have to make, I don't hold anything against them. Could there be a way where they said, my son's relationship with these friends is more important than the politics, so we're going to go to that church. We're going to endure it so he can't. Maybe, but I don't blame them. If it's a toxic environment, don't subject your son to more toxicity. Probably reasonable. But what's weird is that the friendship stopped. They fizzled out. There were a couple more birthday parties, a couple more sleepovers, but it got to a point where I just didn't hang out with them. I wasn't, it got very cliquey, right? Like there was a line drawn in the sand and it was going to be people who stayed and supported the current board of elders and people who left. And a lot of people stayed. My parents were one of, in the minority who left. And so that was always kind of a touchy subject, like, this family's leaving, kind of turning their back, they were only here for the pastor. They weren't here for the body and the blood, right? So again, I was young. I don't know, but I just remember being so sad about having to leave my friends. And maybe we stop there for today. Half hour feels digestible. I mean, that's a sitcom, guys. And so this would put me in second grade. I was 8 years old, and we were looking for a new church. I remember, I'm going to be done, but I'm going to set it up. I remember visiting one, maybe two other churches before we found the church that I stayed at from second grade through ninth grade, through middle school. And this is what I would call the megachurch, or 2002 to 2010's version of the megachurch in the city that I live in. Massive congregation, satellite churches, multiple buildings. You don't know everybody who's there, that kind of thing. So I know we haven't really talked about God in full yet, or even traumatic God-related things. Trust me, they're a coming. So yeah, the next episode, we will do that. And then maybe third episode, we will go high school. Fourth episode, college. And then we'll wrap it up. Fifth episode, my years teaching. And then like my awakening. I don't want to call it that because that makes it sound like I was asleep believing in Christ. And I don't think that that's how it should be phrased. My deconstruction. This would be the most boring episode, I think. So if you liked it, you'll want to come back because it will only get more worse or more better, more exciting. So leave a like, share this with your biggest Christian. Don't do that. Don't share this with anybody unless you think they need to hear it. Okay. We'll see you for episode 2.